Okay, so there's people joining us through the day, and there has, as always in the UK, been issues with transport. So there's been a few trains delayed. So I think even in the next few minutes or next half an hour, there'll be more people coming in. And I think that's going to be how it will feel for the whole thing. You know, some people staying for the whole conversation, some people dropping in. And tonight there'll be a big gathering at Arnolfini to welcome absolutely everyone into the summit. But for now, we have the important business of conversation, of getting to know each other. And I'm going to have the pleasure of talking again tonight. So I'm going to keep this really brief because I want to hand over to the important people in the room who have the kind of provocations and the stuff we need to listen to and respond to. So I'm just going to say really briefly, I'm so pleased that everyone's here. This has been a journey to get here. And believe it or not, it's felt quite challenging to go from making a festival every 2 years into looking out at the world and seeing the world looking very different. And maybe it isn't different. Maybe actually it's always been as fucked up as it is. We're just seeing it now. So we're in this moment of transformation. And I didn't feel like it was possible to continue to make a festival that had a sense of kind of celebration and spectacle at the heart of it. I mean, that's all important, you know, but I think art has a job to do and is also responsible for some of the mess that we're in. So I'm provocatively changing. I mean, it's a small word, festival to summit, but fundamentally what a summit means is it's a gathering of people that are going to do something. So I know that if you're here, you've committed to that in some way, and I want to know all of you, basically, because we will change it together. And I've just gone off script completely, which I'm tending to do because I care a lot about it, but I'm going to go back to my script to make sure I say the things I need to say. So thank you to everyone for joining us. The first ever In Between Time Summit is upon us. In its making, we looked out at the world, at austerity, inequality, racism, the rise of populism, our broken political system, climate emergency, and the arts that still pitches us against each other and privileges the few. IBT is small and mighty, as always a producer of brave leaps and wild imaginings. 2019 is no exception. We've come out fighting with a full arsenal of what the arts has to offer, the kind of art that pierces your armour and seductively screams in your face, the kind of art that shares with you, requires a response from you, that tells the gut-wrenching truth, even if you don't want to hear it. We wanted to consider the role art has to play in this fucked up world. We've called 2019's IBT not just a festival but a summit, an extraordinary gathering of energy, ideas and imagination, reaching out into the people of Bristol, into thought leaders and activist communities on the front line of change. And at the heart of the summit lies the artists, both this generation's and those of the future. We're committing to listen to those artists, to change how we work at In Between Time. And behind all of this are our pledges to change whose bodies are seen, whose voices are heard, to travel less and spend longer and work deeper, to work with exceptional artists and challenging ideas, to welcome, listen and learn from hundreds of Bristolians. And actually in this summit, I will tell you this again later tonight, but there are over 450 Bristolians in the programme in one way or another. Their voices are being heard. They're in films, they're in sound works. And then there's the incredible international artists who have come, and I've spent longer than we've ever been able to keep them in the city, working and impacting so many more people. And then there's a whole cohort of incredible British artists who have come together to work together and are part of the summit. And again, we commit to work with them going forward. So we are together at this summit exploring how art and artists just might save the world. And I'll explain more about what I mean by that later. But thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this first incredible panel. and all of the other conversations that will happen through the day. And I will see you during the day, but also at the drinks tonight and in the shows. So thank you. I'm going to hand back to Marcus and Jean Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Helen. How's everybody doing? All good? Yeah, a few thumbs up, thank you. All right, so we're going to start with our first panel discussion. To whose voices should we be listening? And that's going to be shared by Kamaljit Kerridge-Poonia, who is a leader in equality, diversity and inclusion. Also, we got Yasir Mirza, who is the head of inclusion and diversity at Channel 4. Also, Joe Verrent, who is currently the senior producer for Unlimited, the world's largest commissions program for disabled artists. And also Stacy, Olika, who is a graphic designer, creative producer, and curator, and also whose book you can find on your tables as well, Conversations on Race. So can I bring the panel to the stage, please? Thank you, panel. Now, before the panel, we're going to have an artistic provocation. Ooh, I know. Can I please introduce to the stage Dorothée Munyaneza.
Iribagiza yaragarutse yenda inkotara yidudubiza nyirabukwe nawe abibonye yenda ihindara yidudubiza sebukati nsigaye hehe n'abatora ihindara yidudubiza senyakagara batumbigize ko databuja apfuye n'amabuja bakaba bapfuye izi nka nzazitungirwa n'abatora ihindara yidudubiza inkuru bigeze iwabo biribagiza batiribagiza ngo arapfuye na nyirabukwe yapfuye na sebukwe yapfuye na senyakagarabu waba arapfuye nyina yenda inkotara yidudubiza musaza w'ibindara yidudubiza ese wababyara yidudubiza ibyo wahera ibyo kwa Cyubahiro nuko bigenda bityo imiryango yombi irashira abahungu barapfuye ab'umukobwa barapfuye nuko ibyo wahera
Da da dee da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee dee da 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 dee da da. In the now, we are carriers of many memories. In the now, we are. How many memories can I bear? Nyogoku. Nyogokuru we. How many memories can I bear? Mothers, mothers, carry me, carry we, carry us. I carry you. With you I live. What are the stories that live inside these bodies that carry us? These bodies in which we live. I dance and lay down inhabited by many voices. I see hands and herbs in the sun mending broken bones. Mending. Mwaje mu bantu, ntabwo mwaje mu bisimba. You are among your equal, not among beasts. We are celebration, laughter, voices testifying of our times. Unrushed we are. Celebration, expanding we are. Bold and beautiful, streams untamed, stories unedited. Turi indimi zitandukanye. Turi indimi nyinshi zitandukanye. Foreign tongues, languages unbound, bound for other easts, wests, souths, and norths. Stories in bodies propelled, marching, rising, present. Tumwise tumukunde, tumwise urukundo. We name we, beloved, for we are worthy, we are alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothée, for that deeply resonating opening to our panel's discussions. Really deeply touching. I found that a very moving piece. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Dorothée has joined us on the panel, and we have 3 other speakers, as you've heard previously from the hosts, that will be speaking to you today from their own perspectives and sharing with you their own views around issues to do with inequality and equality and diversity. I think you'll find today a very thought-provoking day, and our offer to you is for you to use that opportunity to think as well. As was mentioned before, we're looking at not just discussing these things, but also what can we do about these things as well from our own space. So I'm Kamaljit Kerridge-Poonia. I've worked in equality and diversity for many years. And thank you very much today for inviting me to chair this panel in an area that I think is so vitally important and so currently important for us in society as well. So when I was thinking of what my opening remarks would be, I thought back to what ignited in me the passion for equality and diversity. These are words that we use now in all sorts of different environments, and different words keep being added, like inclusion, etc. But what was it that ignited the passion for me? And really the passion for this area came from the stories that my father told me, and the stories that he shared with me when I was a very young girl. And he was following a history of oral storytelling which is how you pass on your wisdom to other generations and how you pass on your thinking to other generations rather than the written word. And I was very blessed to have that early on, because what were the stories that he told me? I come from a Sikh background. So the stories that he told me were about Guru Nanak, who was the founder of what is now known as the Sikh religion. But this is before the religion part of it existed. This was a person who went on the search for meaning to life and what was life all about. And he went on a journey with two other men. One was a Muslim and one was a Hindu. And this was really encapsulated straight from the beginning, this issue about unity, this issue about oneness, because you may be aware of our historical backgrounds where Hindus and Muslims and conflict between different communities. He befriended two individuals and they went on this journey together. And they traveled from what we know now as India, right through Afghanistan, right through to the Middle East, picking up stories and picking up other people's thinking and philosophy. So being exposed to Sufism, being exposed to Christian thinking, being exposed to all sorts of other types of thinking. And what had motivated Guru Nanak to leave his privileged background was the inequality that he saw in society, and looking for a meaning about why was this inequality existing, and how do we place ourselves in relation to this inequality. So what were the messages that I got from the stories that my father told me from Guru Nanak's thinking that came from this journey? The messages that I got were, there is no difference between men and women that justifies inequality. There is no such thing as caste. We are all born equal. Being a Sikh is not about going to a place of worship. It's about how we live our lives. It is about our spiritual growth and about the actions we take in life. And knowledge comes from all corners of humanity. As I've said, from Buddhism, Sufism, Christianity, and many more. And then the book that was written, the Granth Sahib, that encapsulates this thinking, is written in many different languages and uses poetry and storytelling and evoking thinking in people as a way to pass that knowledge on. So even before I'd heard of these terms like inclusion and diversity and equality, this is where my passion for this area came from. This is what ignited my thinking. And I think that is really resonant today when we're thinking about whose stories get heard, who gets seen. And certainly my father's story is not being heard out there, but it's igniting me. You know, and there's other people, there's other communities. People's stories are not being seen and heard in the wider world outside. And I think one of the things that we are now challenged with is how do we make the unseen seen? How do we bring these stories out into the open? So that brings me to the here and now. I think we've already heard that we are going through a time of great transformation. We're seeing more energies that are trying to divide us rather than bring us together. So Brexit is doing that. Terrorism has done that. We have a lot of forces that are kind of working to bring us apart rather than how do we share our humanity. And this is where I think the arts in all its different glorious forms can play such an important role. As I said, stories made a big difference to me, and my challenge to you, one of my provocations to you later on when you're doing your thinking, is what ignites you in equality, diversity, and inclusion. The impact of these divisions is seeing a rise in hate crime, and SARI, which is a local organisation which stands for Stand Against Racism and Inequality. You can check them on their website. They have their annual reports which show statistically the rise in hate crimes against all people. against black and minority ethnic people, but disabled people, LGBTQ communities. And this is the challenge to us, both in terms of our own self-expression, but also how do we relate to the challenges that society is throwing our way today. So with that, I want to introduce you to the panel, because they are going to share their thoughts with you, which will take that further. Thank you. So the first person I'm going to introduce to the panel to speak is Yasir Mirza, who's a journalist and head of inclusion and diversity at Channel 4. Over to you.
Thank you.
You take your pick. You can do either. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's really, really great to be here. So I just want to say, Bristol's my hometown. I was born and bred in Bristol. I left about 10 years ago. And Kamaljit, you talked about what does this mean to us as individuals, and we all have our own stories. And I guess one day, probably I have, as someone who was an outsider in Bristol, it was always good, but it's also slightly weird being back in Bristol, but and a story for another day. But it's really nice to be here. Thank you to Helen. Thank you for everyone to have me here. As Helen so eloquently said earlier, we're living in fucked up times and very interesting times. So I want to talk a bit about voices, storytelling, and how do we connect it from three different perspectives, from sort of journalism, from human rights, and from broadcasting. So prior to Channel 4, I worked for a human rights organization, and prior to that, I was a journalist at The Guardian. And I would say, first to give a bit of context, we are living in really interesting times in a world where we have a lot of noise. So we have a lot of polarization, and Kamaljit, you referenced the big B word in Brexit. We have so many different voices out there, and it's actually getting a kind of worse and worse, where people are quite entrenched in their views. We're also sort of in a world where there's a lot of bias, and I'm talking specifically in media. So if you think of how to get a voice heard and how to connect and how to actually even work in an industry which is quite elitist and has a lot of barriers, I guess that's the other context, and I'll go through in a bit more detail of what that means. And then the third one, barriers. You know, for people from marginalized voices, often diverse people get pigeonholed as stereotyping, they get scapegoated, they get blamed, and there's a lack of access into mainstream media. So I think a culmination of all of that really creates more of a need of how do we get our voices heard in a time where actually it's really, really important to get it heard. So when I spent 6 years at The Guardian, they have a really big sort of liberal remit of around the values of representing inclusion, diversity, and equality. I mean, they sort of hold power to account, and they do some amazing journalism in that. But I think when I joined, the view on diversity and equality was always done in a way of, this is a nice thing to do, it's charity, this is the right thing to do, versus there is a wealth of stories that they and we are not tapping into. And that was one of the sort of the tasks that I was trying to get them to think a little bit differently, to say, look, it's not about you need to cover stories from just a basic equality and human rights perspective. There's amazing wealth, richness of stories out there, but in sort of media works in a really strange way, where we sort of we report on fringes. So only things that sit on the extreme right or the extreme left are of interest, and actually there's a wealth of stories in the middle that often get left off. So one of the challenges at The Guardian was to get the newspaper to think differently on diverse voices. How can you show more diversity within diversity? So we didn't just want the one black voice to talk about racism or the one disabled voice to talk about lack of access in the public services. We wanted to get a wealth of voices into the newspaper, which actually shows more nuance, more difference, and actually these are just voices who so happen to be black or disabled or LGBTQ, and that was actually a bit of a challenge because there wasn't much representation. So we did this sort of program where we would look to find new diverse voices from different backgrounds, and I would say two of the writers stand out for me. So we had like 100 writers come through the program, and many were one-hit wonders where they would talk about a human interest story or telling a story that only they could tell, which is a great thing. And others became regular freelance contributors. And the two writers that stick in my mind a few years ago was someone called Ramona Ali, who's a kind of a arts and culture Muslim female headscarf writer who started just to write about everyday life, about how she loves rock bands and how she goes to concerts. And in that time, it was a complete move away from the only things that were talked about in the media about Muslim women with headscarves are oppressed housewife or a terrorist, or Charlie Swinburne, a deaf writer who was an arts and culture writer who actually wanted to talk about arts and culture and actually not about the barriers of people who are disabled, and that started to kick things off and actually start to show a lot more difference and a lot more about people's identities than what we see in front of us. I think also one of the things I've realized with mainstream media in representing marginalized voices, there's a massive chasm and a massive disconnect with people who have really important social issues and stories they want to connect to mainstream media, and actually I would say probably the liberal biases that people have at the top to understand those issues. And we did some programs in India, in South Africa, and Brazil, so we're looking at slum stories and acid attack stories of people in India, to favela stories in Brazil, to rural townships in South Africa. And when we went out there, what people said to us is like, please don't patronize us. We want to get our story told, but we want to tell the stories ourselves. And I think that was a really interesting learning experience, because we did an India week with The Guardian, and rather than sending and parachuting our own journalists out there, what we wanted to do is go out there and really curate, find the voices on the ground, help them connect so they can tell the story themselves. So I think probably one of the biggest lessons that we learned from that experience was around not patronizing and not basically advocating on behalf, just providing a platform and creating a sustainable platform where people can tell stories themselves. And sort of fast forward a bit to Channel 4, it's very much, so I don't know if people are familiar with Channel 4's remit, it's publicly owned but commercially funded, and it's very strongly written into the remit that it has to represent marginalized and diverse voices in the UK. But the question is, what are the voices? Who are the voices? What is the authority? And, who do we actually represent? And I'll never forget, I spoke to my 12-year-old niece, I think about 3 weeks ago, and I just wanted to know what her viewing patterns were in the evening. And I said, what do you watch in the evening? What TV programs do you watch? And she gave me the most strangest look, and she said, I don't watch TV. She goes, I'm like on YouTube or Netflix. And I said, okay. I said, so do you want to see yourself on screen? And she just gave me the most strangest look. She said, well, why do I want to do that? She goes, I'm just really interested in really good content. Dug a little bit deeper, and I said, well, what is it that interests you? And she said, I'm just really interested in content and stuff in the US. And I said, are you not wanting to see yourself on screen? And then she just looked at me and gave me the most strangest look. She said, well, I don't really care. Versus the kind of the traditional, let's provide a platform and get more diverse voices on so people can see themselves. So that kind of led me to think is, what are we trying to do in terms of you being yourself, an authentic self, and having your voice versus being represented? And I think Trevor Noah, the Daily Show chat show host, said it brilliantly. He said that, why is it as a black presenter I'm having to represent a community when you have a white presenter, they're just representing themselves? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a real challenge and sort of breaking down of stereotypes and barriers around what voice are we putting out there, and ultimately we're just putting out our own voices. I want to leave with just my provocation, because I was thinking about it last night, and I think it's really important when we're talking about voices and whose voices that we represent. I think there's so much pressure, and the mainstream world is just changed in terms of news flow, and people getting vilified in public space. So I just wanted to leave you with, I just represent me, not a community. I should neither be pushed into holding this mantle, nor should my community be held to ransom for my own authenticity. So that's what I'd like to leave it. Thank you.
Thank you for that really insightful, the insightful points that you've made there. And I think a couple of things that that strike me is the issue of how in the media and generally we talk about extremes, but the majority of people are those in the middle. And those in the middle, those voices are not getting heard. And they, and as you've said, it may be their individual voice rather than a representational voice, but the majority of people's voices are not getting heard because of the way that we set up one against the other. It distorts our view of the world. And that was seen very much, I remember, during Barack Obama's campaign when he became president. They actually did research and they found out that around 20% of people will always be extreme right-wing or right-wingish, and 20% of people will always be around, extreme liberal or liberalish. But the 60% in the middle are those that are waiting to be persuaded. So thank you. We'll move on to our next speaker. Just to say, there will be an opportunity for questions at the end, so do please write down your questions. There will be a Q&A. It won't be just us speaking at you for the whole morning. Our next speaker is Joe Verrent. And Joe is a senior producer for Unlimited and mobilising and providing opportunities for disabled artists.
I'm the only one with a PowerPoint, so I get to press buttons at the same time. So I've called this Invisible Right Before Your Eyes. So my name's Jo Verrent. I'm senior producer for Unlimited, and we're a commissions programme that supports disabled artists. So a quick line on us. We're a programme. We're not an organisation. We're delivered by Shape Arts and Arts Admin working together with myself, and we're primarily funded by Arts Council of England, but also by Arts Council of Wales, British Council, and the Spirit of 2012 Trust. We have three aims: high quality artwork by exceptional artists, to embed those artists within the cultural sector, and ultimately, a small thing, to transform the perception of disability. But for today, I'm going to add a new strapline. So we're Unlimited. We're a commissions programme for disabled artists, and we support disabled artists because currently you don't. So, the context. Disabled people make up at least a quarter of this country's population. It's hard to be accurate because many people who can still hide their impairments. Stigma, shame, embarrassment, and, as you say, disability, hate crime, 41% increase in the last 2 years. If you can hide it, you'll find your teachers, your friends, your families saying, keep it quiet, no one will ever know. Or people say often, well, you don't look disabled, well done, as though it's a compliment. So, 25% of the population, at least a quarter of the population, and increasing year on year. But we've had disability rights legislation since 1995, the last to join the band. So how's that working for our cultural sector? 4% of the staff in our national portfolio organisations and major partner museums self-define as disabled people in 2016. Just 5% of grants for the Arts Awards, when they were called that, went to disabled artists. Just 9 regularly funded organisations are led by people who self-define as disabled, or have a board where 51% of that board are disabled people. And that's 9 out of 828. So it's just over 1%. I haven't got many audience figures because we're pretty hard to spot in your audiences. 60% of disabled people have invisible impairments. But Audience Finder in London worked out that 9% of audiences said that their day-to-day activities were limited by a health condition or disability. I'm just making a wild guess, but I'm imagining it's not great outside London either. So we have the law protecting our rights, and there's also endless publications, videos, and case studies about how to include us. I know, I've spent 30 years writing the fuckers. There's a whole industry in equality and awareness training out there too. But nothing much changes. So the only conclusion that I can come to is that many arts organisations deliberately want to exclude disabled people as artists, participants, staff and audience members. And they're doing really, really well at it. And this is pretty much an industry crowd, so congratulations. A show of hands or limbs. Who here uses Twitter? Yeah, quite a few there. Keep your hands or limbs in the air if you always alt text your images every time you post a tweet to enable visually impaired people to see them. Okay? Who puts promo videos or live event videos up online? Yeah, some, not many. Keep your hands in the air if you always have captions so that me as a deaf person can access that content. A couple, excellent, but not everybody. And who wants to include disabled people in their audiences? Who actually ensures that they regularly program disabled artists or has quotas to ensure that disabled people are within their companies and collectives? Do you know we aren't hard to reach? At around a quarter of the population, we're actually pretty easy to find, to be honest. We're here waving at you. We're hidden in plain sight. You just don't notice us. You've been so conditioned to see disability as a negative, an irrelevance, an irritation, a problem, that you can't believe that we can actually be a positive. You're so conditioned to believe the stories that abound, saying that we're just making it up, that we should just try a bit harder, and that we should be grateful for everything you do to include us. And you're so conditioned to be fearful of losing something and becoming one of us that you can only see us through a veil of pity. And that scared perspective colours your view on everything that we do. So here's some good news. Disabled people are here. We've been here and will continue to be here for as long as we're all here. Some of us are just born that way, others have gained impairments. Some of us have gained them due to the very structures and systems that we as a society have created. It's no surprise that the World Health Organization has announced that depression is now a global crisis. Just to be clear, that's not the good news. We're not aliens, but some of us are a little bit pissed off now. And you can probably guess why. We can be great artists, participants, staff members, audiences. There've always been great artists. Talent isn't discriminatory. But you are. The systems, the processes, the hurdles, the jumps that you have created to fence in the arts have all been designed to keep us out, and they're working. But the good news, I said there was some. The good news is that you can change all of that, and you can change it all really, really quickly. Not only to make yourselves feel better, but because it's morally, legally, ethically, and in all ways possible, the only right and proper thing to do. And you can do it by following 5 simple steps. Step 1, stop making excuses. Step 2, make it a priority. And yes, that means putting a budget against it. Step 3, do the stuff you know you should be doing. And if you genuinely don't know, it's the stuff disabled people have been telling you that you should be doing for the last X number of years. And if you still don't know, take 3 days off, read all the resources, the case studies, watch the videos, listen to the podcasts, write a fucking list. 4, make it part of everybody in your organisation's job to ensure equality of access. Make every staff member report on what they do at their appraisal. 5, you know your short, medium and long-term goals? Well, look again. Move everything you have in your medium goals around access into your short-term goals. And take the ones in the long term and move them into your medium term. We've waited long enough already. We're not here to do your work for you, but we are here to make it easier and hopefully to work in partnership. You may have noticed some of the slides that I've been showing whilst I talk. They're all examples of work by incredible disabled artists that we've supported. And we're only a small part of the ecosystem that supports disabled artists in the UK. It's just a tip of the iceberg. There are many more companies and artists and projects creating equally astonishing, relevant, provocative and challenging work. And also work that's just nice, if that's your bag. We are allowed to make non-politically charged work, if we so wish. In fact, the work isn't just incredible, it's often groundbreaking. It's form-breaking. It's increasingly intersectional, cross-art form, flexible, fluid, and interesting. And much of it is actually changing how other artists and companies work. The work is leading the change. It's the sector that's lagging behind. Since 2013, we've provided nearly £4 million to 280 different disabled artists through commissions, awards and support. There's masses of really good work out there that needs more exposure and more of the spotlight. You could be part of that. We have an allies scheme where organisations can sign up to support us, and we really commit to supporting you too. We have around 300 organisations globally on that list, but that means there are over 600 NPOs who don't think it's relevant to them. We provided articles and guides, we've got an animation on the social model of disability, we've even got a card game called Cards for Inclusion, which is downloadable for free, so that people can think about access creatively and through play. We run events all the time on anything from access to disability and the climate emergency. The next one, Salisbury, next week. Come along. We're really trying to do our bit, and we're getting tired. It's your turn now. Oh, to be fair, it's always been your turn, but you've just not woken up to it yet. So when we talk about whose voices should we be listening to, for me, it's the voice of disabled artists. And every artist that I've shown a slide of, I will tweet about later so that you can follow up on them, should you wish. But for now, what I want is action. I don't want more words. I don't want to have to write another guide. I don't want to have to show people or tell people what to do. All that material is out there now. It's now about actions and not words. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. And I think that has really set the tone for what we need to put our minds today. The issue is that this isn't something that is for somebody else to do. This is something for all of us to do. And sometimes, I've been training and working in equality and diversity for many, many years. And this area has always sometimes been seen as something you do after the day job, something you do after you've got all your priorities and your emergencies and your to-do list out of the way. And it's something that happens in the margins. And it's about how do we bring this into the mainstream. It's always been a question in the work that I've been doing, and we're still asking those questions. And how you bring it is by everybody taking responsibility. It's not somebody else's to do. It's not for the people who are from those excluded communities, if that's how we want to term it, to take the actions, but for all of us. And that's the challenge to us today. Very beautifully put there, Joe. Thank you. Again, you'll have time to ask more questions on that. I'm going to turn to our final speaker on the panel for today, who is Stacy Olika. And she is a curator, Why We Are Not Here, and Young Diverse Voices.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm a graphic designer, curator and creative producer within the city. Some of the stuff I've worked on is Why We're Not Here exhibition recently at Spike Island, which gave the ability to have young emerging creatives of ethnic background the space to be able to share their work, and then for them to be in institutions that normally don't give them the space to be in. So just a little bit about myself. So I've lived in Bristol now for, what year are we in? 13 years now. And before that, I grew up in Switzerland. And it's not until I came to Bristol, funnily enough, that I had to start questioning my identity and the spaces that sort of let me in and let me reside in. And one thing that has led from all of that is the publications that you have on the table. So Conversations About Race is a publication I made whilst I worked at the University of the West of England in partnership with the graphic design students. And it is about bridging the gap, having the conversations, having that open dialogue to be able to have open, honest conversations, and has become sort of a toolkit in order for us to make a change. I wanted to start this off by giving a quote by the founder of Rising Arts Agency, Kamina Walton. And she stated, "I do not see the diversity and inclusion that we hear so much about. Bristol is vibrant, dynamic, and a diverse city with a thriving creative sector, but the workforce remains disproportionately unrepresentative of the city's cultural makeup." And I think she's hit the nail right on the head. And that's why when creating work and when taking parts in projects that I have taken part in, one of the first things that I think about is, how does this benefit my community? And the reason that I do this is because we have become so marginalized in this city and elsewhere that unfortunately one voice does represent the voice of so many others. And that is a heavy, heavy burden to have to carry. So a lot of the work that I do focuses on representation and creating the spaces where people that look at me can feel comfortable enough to talk about what they want to talk about without having to deal with the trauma of explaining their situation and life experiences to other people. And also, my favorite, challenging institutions. The thing about institutions, and I've, over the last couple of years, so I graduated 2 years ago, and I was very scared to initially tackle institutions and very scared to use the term institutional racism. And as I've carried on doing the work that I've been doing and seeing what's going on, I've thought, you know what? I'm not going to be scared anymore. We've got to say it how it is. So institutional racism has become a part of normality. What is deemed as normal in the workplace or an institution is normal to white European standards. So anything that does not fit into that spectrum is seen as abnormal. For instance, someone wearing dreadlocks to work is deemed as inappropriate. Someone wearing their afro out is deemed as inappropriate or not tidy to some. These people are now looked at as the other. But we have to ask yourselves, why are they the other? Who makes them the other? It is a system filled with racism, and I always think about how do we tackle these different situations? And I think we are at the beginning of that era of being able to tackle it, but I think we have to understand that where we are all sitting right now, we are literally a few miles, whatever, away from a bridge that was named after a slave, an exchange hall where slaves used to be exchanged. And that's why I'm focusing very much on having that open and honest conversation and having the space to have that dialogue. And we don't get that a lot. And I think it's because we're too afraid to have that conversation. And one thing we shouldn't be afraid of is accountability and taking that accountability. We have people working within the culture, making culture, that are not currently representative of Bristol's demographics. We have to look at the decision makers. You have to ask yourself, why are those of Black, Asian, minority, ethnic background below admin level in your offices? Being the majority in a place does not automatically guarantee you a seat at the table. For example, so my father works in a housing association, and one of the things he said to me is that, he said, there's no people of colour in the board of directors. The board advises how to run an organisation, and one of their core values is diversity, but in all senior positions, there's not a single person of colour. There have been people there that have worked there for 15 to 20 years and have trained people to be managers, but they themselves have been in the same positions for 15 to 20 years. We need to challenge these people, and we need to challenge even itself what HR looks like. And I think through that, that's some of the reasons why I do the things I do. So in terms of conversations about race, the publication on there for you, I saw the lack of representation in the art industry and how that took a toll on me whilst I was going to university, and has taken a toll on me for so many different years. And I just felt compelled to have to create that, because I thought to myself, it might be a long time before there's somebody in that position to be able to do that again. And I created, so whilst I was at university, I created a platform called Agents of Change, which is all about giving people that look like me the space to talk about their art, to talk about their creative process and their creative thinking, and to make us the decision makers, to make young people like me the decision makers, but partnering with institutions so that we can have an event created by us and for us. It's a space of not having to talk about your trauma of being a Black woman, but just about your craft, and the fact that you are there is saying enough. And one of the last things that I recently did, so I talked a little bit about Why We're Not Here exhibition, which was commissioned by Test Space at Spike Island. And one of the incredible things that I saw from that was the amount of people that were within that space that normally did not feel welcomed in that space, especially the opening night. The amount of young people of colour that were within that space, I think, said a lot. And having young people of colour who created that exhibition said a lot in itself. And it was called Why We're Not Here. And one of the things that I always said is that we have always been here, you just haven't noticed us. So just to end my on a provocation, mine is, accountability is important, but do you deserve a seat at the table?
Thank you, Stacy. And thank you for putting it out there that it's time to call it for what it is. That maybe we've all been skirting around the issues, and that because it's uncomfortable, we haven't actually called out what some of these issues actually are about. And I think it's time now where I think people are feeling we can't really stay quiet. But there's always a penalty, isn't there, for calling things out? And I think that's something that all of those people here who don't have to maybe face those penalties need to think about. Because, I mean, just recently with the case of Naga Munchetty and how she spoke and what she spoke and said on television was viewed in a particular way. Whereas when I was listening to it, I viewed it in another way, and I think many other people did. So I think there are issues when we talk about diversity, that you bring different people into whatever it is that the establishment is, but that's going to change things. It doesn't just stay the same. It doesn't just mean that people just become another version of the establishment, and that there are diverse voices and different ways of expressing oneself. So are institutions ready for inclusion and not just diversity?